Hi, it's Alex here. So welcome to this lesson on understanding vehicle locking mechanisms. So this is a lesson introduction. What I'm going to do is get you familiar with some of the terminology used, and just so all of this makes sense when we get into the more advanced lessons. So in this lesson, we're going to talk about the evolution of car locks and security, the key differences between the old and modern systems, and identifying vulnerabilities in car security. So let's talk about the types of vehicle locks. So the most common types of locks found in vehicles are wafer locks. So these are common in most vehicles and they're easy to pick. So these will be, your standard bladed key, which goes into the car door. Now, a lot of cars, you might think they don't actually have a car key, like an actual keyhole, but they often do. If you pull off the cap on the handle, that will expose the keyhole where you can then pick it. So, people often don't use their bladed key these days. They've got the remote, they just press the button and open the door. But they do, most cars do have the keyhole still under the key handle for emergency purposes. So let's say your battery goes flat on your car key, you can still access the vehicle through this way. Now, moving on to smart locks that have no physical key, they're fully electronic and they use keyless entry. So let's say as an example, so a 1998 Toyota may use the standard wafer lock, whereas a 2023 Tesla relies on smart locks with digital authentication. So let's talk about how wafer locks function. They consist of flat wafers that align when the correct key is inserted. We're creating a shear line with the key. So without the key being inserted into this lock, all of these wafers you can see will be pushing out into this chamber that you can see here. So these little notches that you can see here will be pushing up on the spring's tension, both up and down, because there's also a hole on the bottom of this casing here. So without the key being inserted, these wafers are being pushed up into this housing, which will prevent this core from being turned. Now, when we insert the correct key, because it's cut specifically to these wafers, what will happen is that they will all align flush and be pulled down out of this hole so that basically it can turn. So that's the best way I can explain it. There's also a locking bar in here as well, which is like an extra feature to the lock, but that's basically it in a nutshell. So these are your wafers, these are your springs, this is the core, and this is the housing. So when we're picking this, we're essentially picking each wafer one at a time to get it out of this hole here. So like I said, these are found in the most common types of vehicles, and they can be picked with with basic lock picking tools, so the Lishy tools. So the weakness in these locks are obviously that they can be picked quite easily with a little bit of know-how. So you might be wondering, can someone buy one of these Lishy picks from eBay and go out and steal a car? They can't do that because they don't have the programming equipment to then speak to the ECU to then program a new key to that vehicle. So even if they pick the vehicle lock, they decoded it, then they cut a key, that key will turn the ignition, but it won't start the vehicle because we haven't got the transponder chip programmed to the key yet. So obviously another weakness with this is these wafers can wear out. So let's move on to smart locks and keyless entry. So what are smart locks? So these are electronic locks that are often activated by a key fob, an app, or a fingerprint. So no physical keyhole in many cases. It uses encryption to communicate and prevent hacking. So the common examples are proximity key systems. So you might have one of these yourself. When you get into your vehicle, you don't need to put the key into the ignition. It uses a radio signal to speak with the ECU. Push button start. So these are often used in conjunction with the proximity keys, and remoteless key entry. So these are used by a phone app or Bluetooth. So the potential weaknesses here is they can be hacked using relay attacks, and they're more expensive to replace or program. But you're going to be embracing this technology in your career as an auto locksmith. As things evolve, you'll be keeping your ear to the street, so to speak, and you'll be evolving with the technology, upgrading your equipment. And like I said, that will give you a bigger market share once you can start offering more of these keyless jobs. So let's talk about an example when I actually heard about a lot of Range Rovers were being stolen by people were simply downloading an app, and they were able to basically decode Range Rovers just using this app. So this Range Rovers were the highest stolen car in London at one point, and nobody would insure these cars. So if you had a Range Rover, you'd go to get it insured, it would either be a fortune or no one would touch it because they were just getting stolen so easily. So you can see where the flaws do come in this, because if they had these traditional wafer locks that we talked about, thieves might not be so inclined to learn a new skill. They'd rather just download an app and steal the car that way. So there are pros and cons to both of these systems. So let's talk about key fobs, transponders, and immobilizers. So key fobs and remote entry. So they use radio frequency, also known as RF, to communicate with the car. Many include built-in transponders for security. They can be cloned or replaced with programming tools. So what is a transponder? So that will be the small chip inside the key that sends a unique code to the car. Now, if the code doesn't match, the engine won't start. So this is found in most cars after 1995. So like I said earlier, if you were to pick a vehicle open, cut a new key to it, and turn it in the ignition, the key would turn the ignition, but nothing would happen. The car would try and turn over, but the engine wouldn't start because it doesn't have that final layer of security. So what is an immobilizer? An immobilizer is a system that prevents the car from starting without a program key. So even if the key turns the ignition, the car won't start without the correct signal. This requires key programming tools to bypass or reprogram. So on the right hand side here, you can see a basic diagram of a key. We've got the key, the casing of the key. In here, we've got the circuit board, which often has the remote buttons on, the battery to power this, and here's your transponder chip. Now, this is the vital bit. You could actually do away with this. Obviously, you wouldn't have a remote with it, but you could just have this transponder alone and the casing, and you could still start the car because it's just the radio frequency speaking to the car from this chip. So you wouldn't need to power this chip with a battery in most cases. So the differences between the old and modern security systems. So any older cars, usually 95, 2000, they were mostly mechanical locks, so they used either wafer or pin tumblers. They were easy to pick or bypass. They had no transponders, so any duplicated key could start the car. I'm sure if you're of a certain age, you can remember people breaking off the ignition barrels and starting the car with a screwdriver. That can no longer be done because obviously you need the correct transponder. So modern car security after 95, 2000, something like that, they use transponder keys and immobilizers to prevent hot wiring, keyless and smartless, that would be a new one, keyless and smart locks to add that extra level of security, and encrypted programming prevents unauthorized duplication. So for an example, a 1995 Honda Civic could be started with a duplicated key. So if you had the key to someone's car, you could go to a shop, ask them to duplicate it, without any programming, and that will start the car. But for example, a 2022 BMW will require key programming before it will start. So really, in this day and age, it's very rare that you're going to come across these cars before 2000s, before 1995. If you do, it's going to be very easy. You just need to cut a new key to it without any programming. But obviously, if you want to become a modern, that would leave you with a market of about one job every 2 years. So, you really need the equipment to get going with this, especially if you want to offer lost car key replacements. So the common vulnerabilities in this car security. So the way that criminals would bypass car locks is by lock picking. So these were on the older cars. They would do the Slim Jim attacks, the creating with the air wedge, creating a gap and unlocking the lock mechanisms. The relay attacks, so they would amplify the signal of a key fob to unlock the door and start the car remotely. Key cloning, so you could just often, copy the key and you wouldn't need to copy the transponder. So the way that cars and dealerships have protected against these threats is by upgrading the locks to high security models. So the physical locks themselves have got more sophisticated, although the Lishy picks make that easy. Disabling passive entry systems when not needed, and using encrypted key programming to prevent cloning. For an example, a relay attack can unlock a car parked in a driveway by extending the signal from the key inside the house. So let's say someone's car was parked on their driveway and their key to the vehicle was hanging up by their front door. Hackers would be able to actually amplify that signal to the vehicle to open it and drive away. So here's a quick summary, and I'll let you know what's happening in the next lesson. So different cars use different types of locks, wafers and smart locks. Most modern vehicles have transponders and immobilizers for security. Criminals use relay attacks, picking and cloning to bypass security. And understanding lock types helps you choose the right tools and techniques. So do subscribe to this channel to keep updated, obviously. And the link in the description will take you to a free course, a free auto locksmithing course called Auto Locksmith Mastery. So make sure you grab that. It's 100% free. And in the next lesson, we'll be covering key cutting and duplication. So I'll see you then.